All right. Well, hey, this is going to be a real exciting segment. I'm really looking forward to this. If you look at the title, it is a mouthful. The pros and cons of short-term rentals with Melissa Nash, and then the pros and cons of long-term rentals with myself, Scott Saunders. This is going to be an exciting segment. Melissa, great to have you here hopping on. Thanks so much for joining on this discussion.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's great. So Melissa and I have kind of collaborated together, and you'll learn a little bit more about her background in a moment and then mine. But we have a lot of crossover. We both have experience with long-term rentals and investment real estate, but we've got different areas of specialty. So I brought a little outline on of what we're going to cover, a little background on Melissa and myself, and then we're going to get into the meat of today's topic, looking at what are some of the benefits of short-term rentals? Those are Airbnb, shorter-term rentals, things like that. Melissa's going to talk about all the benefits and some of the negatives. And then I'm going to take it from there and talk about long-term rentals, particularly single-family rentals. And what are the benefits, the disadvantages? We'll talk a little bit about financing. We'll kind of give up some wrap-up thoughts. And then finally, if you're watching this, you want to know, how do you get a hold of Melissa Nash after you hear all the wisdom she has to share? Or how do you get a hold of me, Scott R. Saunders? And we'll share our contact information. So with that, Melissa, I've got a little bit of your background, but talk a little bit about, what you've done with investment real estate. You're an investor, you're a coach, you do so much. Talk a little bit about yourself, and you're just a great resource. I know you and I've chatted many times, over a number of years on things. So talk about yourself there.
Okay, I will wrap it up and make it short and sweet. I've been an investment coach for over 10 years now, and I believe all real estate is amazing. It doesn't matter, there's a time and a place for everything, and there's a budget for everything. But as long as you're moving forward and you're doing something with real estate, because of all the amazing benefits that you always talk about, and I talk to with my students as well. So I do believe in short-term rentals. I do believe in long-term rentals. I believe in commercial. I mean, whatever it is, whatever makes sense. It's all really good, amazing stuff. And so recently I own a portfolio of both short-term and long-term. Recently, over the last 4 years, I've been focusing on short-term rentals. And right now as of today, I have sold some. As of today, I own 5 that I self-manage myself in 2 states, California and Utah. And the portfolio of just those 5 properties is over 5 million at this point. Actually, no, that's wrong. Sorry, it's 4 million on those 5. So sorry, I had a little bit of error there. I was doing the math in my head. That sounds a little bit higher than it is. It's actually 4 million, which is still awesome. I'm so proud of that.
Well, wait a minute, Melissa. Give yourself just a few years, and I'm sure all on its own, a $4 million portfolio is going to grow to 5. We all know what real estate does in the long term. It goes up because of inflation and supply and demand. So it's just a matter of a few years, and it'll be well north of 5 million, I'm sure.
Well, that's so true, because the properties that I own are luxury type properties in areas that appreciate very, very quickly. And that's been part of my strategy and why the portfolio grew so fast, which we can dive into and talk about. But yeah, these 5 properties, I self-manage them myself. They bring in anywhere, depending on the seasons. I try to strategically buy houses that complement the seasons, meaning that I have some houses that are really slow in the hot months of August and September here in California. But then I have properties, those are the high seasons. So I try to balance my properties and locations to where I can always be bringing in rental income in a consistent basis. So anywhere from 30 to 45,000 a month is what they bring in.
Wow, that's, hey, fascinating that you've actually worked on blending your portfolio. So, sometimes people think of a niche. I've got a friend that happens to like Hawaii, and he's kind of all in on that niche, right? And so he has short-term rentals there. I really like to hear you share that you've actually looked, even though you don't have a huge number, you've been very methodical to try and kind of smooth your cash flow out over an annual basis. So you're not in just one area that has that spike in demand and then drops down to zero. So that really interesting. What a great bit of planning you've done there.
Well, thank you. And I think it's probably because of my long-term portfolio that I also own, and talk to my students about growing their long-term portfolios as well, because those are year-round consistent income. So I'm so used to running the numbers annually, and so I've got that ingrained in my head. And with short-term rentals, it's really hard to, I mean, it is an annual, you're looking at it annually, but also you've got to make those bills every month. And my luxury properties, they cost a lot more. I'm paying bigger mortgages, bigger insurance, I have to pay for all the utilities, the cable, everything. So those have to be paid every month, whether it's rented out a lot or not. And so for me to be able to always have income coming in, no matter what the season is, has always been really important for me.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, just, a little bit on your background. I mean, I heard you say running the numbers. You help investors all over the country run numbers, analyze assets, so I mean, having somebody with just your background, you've looked at properties probably in most of the states, or certainly many states, crunch numbers, looked at the cash flow, the appreciation. You're just a wealth of knowledge. So it's just great to have somebody of your caliber. I know we're talking about short-term and long-term, but you bring all this great context on just looking at investment real estate. So it's great to visit with you for a little bit. And I'm sure you'll have some little nuggets of information to come out. And I'd encourage people, take notes. You're dealing with Melissa, who's really an expert in this space of real estate, who's just going to be dropping a whole bunch of nuggets from her real life experience. So great to have you here.
Thank you. You're watching my head like grow. No, I literally will have like dreams and nightmares about, like, I see like pro formas in my sleep and in my dreams, and like inspection reports. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it doesn't stop. Like, I'm even analyzing in my dreams.
That's funny. Now I'm the opposite. I don't actually, I pretty much don't even run performers as much anymore. I just kind of eyeball a few key things, go boom, boom, boom. So,
Yep.
and I think it's great. You mentioned you've got a portfolio of short-term and long-term, so you've got a blended approach. Let me switch over to the slide on a little bit of my background. So I've kind of been the opposite. I've kind of grown and scaled with a lot of smaller single-family rentals all over the place. So right now on long-term, I've got 71 single-family rentals, 4 that are multifamily, so 75 that are what we call long-term rental properties. And mine are spread out, which frankly is probably too spread out. I didn't need to diversify as much as I did, but that allowed me to grow and scale. And what I have, Melissa, new news is, we've talked probably a couple of months back. I have one short-term rental property. It's under contract, and it is in Tuscany, Italy, and I'm so excited about it. So I kind of went off the rails and decided to jump in and do something different. I thought about, well, where would I like to visit a property? And I'm like, well, Florida, it's okay, but it's Florida. And I'm here in Colorado where we've got all these great properties, but I go there anyway. And I'm like, I love Italy. I love Tuscany. I've been there a bunch. So I've got a property there under construction. It's putting my toe in the water. It's going to be like all old world construction. It'll have a pool, a bocce ball courts. It'll have gardens. It'll have an outdoor pizza oven, and that'll be ready in a little over 12 months. So I'm a little nervous. It's overseas. The whole process is different, right? I've already wired some significant earnest money. I'm hoping it all goes well. I probably have a little bit of risk being a USA investor in a foreign country, but I'm putting my toe in the waters. That asset, I should rent out maybe 5-6 months of the year. And you can bet that once a year or more, I'm going to be visiting my investment property, checking in on it, making sure everything's going all right. And I'll be hanging out a little bit in Italy, and it's up in northern Italy, an area where I've actually never been. So I'll be exploring, and hopefully it'll be a good investment over time.
It sounds like fun. Sounds like a lot of fun, and I might be there with you.
Well, it won't always be rented. So at this point, the portfolio now, in terms of gross income, it's a little north of $1 million in terms of gross rental income on an annual basis, 12, 13 million in value among all the properties. And what I want to do, honestly, is I'd like to add a few more short-term rentals to the portfolio. Maybe I'll pick one up in Florida, maybe up in the mountains. I want to at the same time keep growing and scaling with my long-term rentals and doing that. I'm a big believer in that. Long-term rentals, are kind of an overlooked asset class. People think, oh, you've got to own an apartment complex or an office building or a big warehouse, industrial. And as you and I know, Melissa, there are a lot of people that build wealth by just buying really fairly ordinary investments, and they get good at it and they do it over and over.
Yep.
And down the road, that portfolio is fairly significant. It's got a lot of value. It's got a lot of cash flow. So I'm a big fan of doing that, but I'll just like you, I plan to blend the long term and add some short-term rentals and just continue doing that. So that's a little bit of my background. Now I want to hear and kind of dig into your niche. So I just have an open-ended slide to like kind of just let you share all your wisdom and emotes. So talk about why you chose short-term rentals. Maybe start off what a short-term rental is for people that don't know, why you chose it, and then jump into kind of what do you think are some of the advantages and then what are some of the challenges. So the floor is yours, Melissa.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So a short-term rental is anything that you rent for 30 days or less, basically under 30 days. Anything over 30 days would be considered either a long-term rental or a midterm rental. So anything under that 30 days is the short-term rental. And I kind of got into it by accident. Not necessarily, it wasn't an accident, but it wasn't on purpose how I ended up with this portfolio. Basically, I mean, I'm a firm believer of these long-term rentals. And like you said, single family is like one of my favorite asset classes. And that's really what I focus on. And so, so as I've been buying and growing and doing those, I thought, they're great, but they're kind of boring. Like I don't see them. I don't use them. I don't even go to the states that I own them in. They do their thing. The property manager is there. They do their thing. I mean, they're very, very passive. And so the way that I first started short-term rentals is I was like, hey, I would like to buy a property in a place I like to visit. Similar to you wanting to do the Tuscany thing, the exact same thought process. My thought process was, as long as it pays for itself, I don't care if it makes money. I don't care if it brings in cash flow. I just want to use it with my family. And then it's going to cover its expenses. Basically, the goal that we always talk about with owning, why do we own this real estate and why are we buying it all? It's because we all want that, really ultimately the financial freedom that these properties are bringing to us, because we know time just goes so fast. And I just wanted a place where I could slow down and be with my family and enjoy them, all that stuff. So anyway, so long story short, I found a condo in a ski town in Utah, actually, that we love to go and visit. And
So
I ran
where in Utah? I was just there in Park City last weekend. Where in Utah is it?
This is actually Bryan Head, southern Utah.
Okay. All right.
And it's actually the closest ski resort outside of California. So if you wanted to go hit Utah snow, most Californians are going to go to Bryan Head.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So yeah, and it's a little resort. It's not big. It's not super touristy. It's becoming popular, but very affordable. California resorts are so expensive. And so it was more just, okay, I think the numbers make sense that where it will cover its costs. So we got into this property and I used it as a vacation home, which meant I only put 10% down versus 20% down. And then we ended up renting it out because we couldn't be there all the time. And so I think my initial investment was like $15,000.
Wow. So 50, you know what? I would tell you most people would think to do a vacation home, it would take a lot more capital. So you got into it for give or take 15,000.
Mhm.
That's a pretty modest investment to get your toe into the water of doing that. How long ago did you buy that property?
That was
Melissa?
5 years ago.
Okay. And today, what would that property? How much has it gone up? Just out of
Well,
curiosity.
we sold that property and we did a 1031 exchange, which led to growing this portfolio, which is part of my strategy.
Oh,
We sold it a year later and I think we profited about $130,000 just in 1 year.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Did you do any research on the market of looking at stuff? How did you, I mean, you wanted to go there personally, but when you were looking at the market, did you much research of just kind of looking at rents, or did you go by kind of just gut feel and from knowing the area?
I knew that that area was going to blow up because I had been researching, and we love to go there anyways. And I had been reading a lot of articles. And one of the tips that I'll tell you about is go to the city and the county websites and read the notes that's going, they have like recorded notes from the meetings, the things that people are talking about, what developers are there, what projects they're talking about. And I knew from reading those notes from the town hall meetings that there were some big developments that were starting to go on. The resort had just been bought out by a bigger company, and they were planning on expanding the resort. And there's only one hotel in that entire area, which is a big deal. Everything else is condos or houses.
Okay. Okay.
So your
Excellent.
biggest competition with the short-term rental is the hotels. And so the other thing was, well, it's just seasonal, it's just ski, you know, but they had the new resort owners started doing events in the summer. They turned the entire resort into BMXing. So you could put your bikes on the, what are the
The ski
ski
chairlift.
lifts, the ski lifts. You can put your bikes on them and they take you up, and they've got trails, and they were doing summer concerts, and they were really trying to build it up year round.
Okay.
Now, all of a sudden the math was going to make sense, because that's the scariest thing, is just putting all your cards in on the winter months. And if they don't get good snow, you're out of business. So,
Right.
so being able to rent it year round was a pretty big deal. Then I went and I was looking on Airbnb, VRBO. Every single cabin that I looked at looked like it was grandma's stinky cabin that's moldy since 1970. You know, I was like, I don't want to stay in any of these. Like, there's nothing, you know, yeah, no wonder they're only getting $100 a night. That's all they're worth. So I thought, you know, if I could bring some luxury to something, fix it up, modernize it, put some luxury bedding in, some luxury mattresses, I can get a premium where these other places are not doing that. So that was my goal, is to find a place that needed a little bit of work, that looked terrible in the photos, had good bones. I could put in the minimal amount of design and then just bring that luxury and newness to it. And it paid off. I mean, that's why I raised the value of it so quickly, is really because I made it appealing and enticing. And I think we only put maybe $10,000 into it.
Wow, that's not much. So what I heard, you did your homework. You found there are a lot of saggy properties that were just kind of so. You knew you could come in, freshen one up, have it bumped up. And I know with vacation rentals, you know, even for me personally, when I go away on vacation time, I want it to be pretty nice. You know, I don't want to stay in some kind of so place for a whole week. That's kind of diminished the experience. So you went in, you bumped it up, you freshened it up, and your strategy paid off. That's a great story.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people don't think that they could do that, or they're not capable of it. But when you're looking at listings, this was on Zillow. I mean, nobody showed me this property off market or anything. I just think so many people passed it by because it just looked dingy and it looked dark and it looked, you know, all it needed was some new paint, some new appliances, some freshening up. And I think a lot of people are afraid that they can't do that. And you can also hire people to do that for you if you don't feel like you're capable of it. But I think that that's the reason why I found an undervalued property that other people didn't want.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
no, that's awesome. And then, so that was your very first one, was this resort area that and I'm a California native. I've never even heard of this place. So, pretty cool that you just knew what was appealing to people. That was your first one. Where'd you go after that? So you did a 1031 out of it into other properties. What did that lead to?
Yeah. So then I did a 1031 out of that, and we thought, you know, where else do we like to vacation? What place do we love that's close by? And here's the thing for me is my definition. I drew on a circle on a map because I still had kids at home that were in school, in sports, and these had to be weekend getaways for us. It couldn't be long-term travel. So I drew a circle and we saw Palm Springs. I love Palm Springs. I love the heat. I love the style, love the aesthetics. It's actually it has been consistently always in the top 10 vacation rental destinations in the United States. Still is in the top 10, has been for a long time. So one thing I liked about Palm Springs also is they had already battled the short-term rental rules and problems because it's always been a vacation destination. And so a lot of the cities now are just now battling it because areas that didn't used to be destinations have become destinations where all of a sudden the short-term rentals are popping up everywhere. So Palm Springs already figured it out. They had these battles years and years ago, and they came up with all the rules, regulations, laid it all out. And if you want to have a short-term rental here you go. It's already done. So it felt safe for me to not have to worry about future regulations shutting us down or changing. Not to say they couldn't change, they could always change, but the town relies so much on tourism. There's always going to be tourism.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Okay.
So we found again, a distressed property that was going to need a little bit of work. The problem with that at this point is it became very, very competitive. You couldn't find properties. And so I'll give you a tip that I tell this to everybody. Whenever you're in a market where people are battling over properties, some people jump into properties a little bit sooner than they probably should, and they may or may not have their financing 100% sorted out. So a lot of times houses fall out of escrow because they run into financing issues because they had to jump so quickly. And so what I did to get this property is I went on the MLS and I was searching for properties, and I sorted it under contract. I wanted to know which properties were already under contract. Then I looked at the dates. How long have they been in escrow? If they've been in escrow over 30 days, there might be a problem with their financing. So I found this house. It had been in escrow for like 50 days and hadn't closed yet. And I sent it over to my realtor and I said, I think there's a problem here. They're not closing. So he reached out to the listing agent, and the listing agent said, yeah, they're on their second lender right now. There's a problem. And I said, I'll give you over 10,000 what they had under contract and cancel the deal with them as soon as you can legally, as soon as they fall out of those dates, and we're next in line. They accepted it.
Wow, that's great. So here, what a great tip. So that's just based upon your experience, right? You're looking for people that are having troubles getting the loans in place. They can't close. So and what you did, this isn't somebody, you're not using inside knowledge. You're just using common sense, looking for deals and doing that. I love how you approached it that way. And you kind of just scooped up a good opportunity, gave them a little incentive to the seller to sell it to you. And I'm sure you probably had your financing all lined up. You came in pre-qualified, so you were a strong buyer. And now that seller's like, great, I get to sell my property and get this deal done. So what a smart move.
Thank you. And for 10,000 more. So they were incentivized. The realtor was incentivized. The seller was incentivized. They're like, yeah, we're not wasting time with Joe on a second lender. We're switching to you. And you're right. You have to, whether you're buying short-term rental, long-term rental, whatever it is, you need to have your lending, your financing sorted, have your pre-approval always ready to go. I always have a pre-approval ready to go. You never know what you're going to see. You never know what you're going to find, what opportunity is going to come in front of you. Always have your pre-approval ready to go.
Yep. No, that's a great, and you're right. That applies long-term, short-term. I always am pre-approved whenever I make a offer on something. I typically right now I work with the same lender. I've got a bank that I work directly with, and we got a long-term relationship. And so I can make an offer super strong because I'm coming in with everything lined up on the financing. That helps. So that was your second one. Where'd you go from there?
Well, so this house needed a little bit of work. And this was during COVID, during shutdown. So it actually was like the perfect storm for us because schools were shut down, kids' sports were shut down, everything was shut down. So we looked at this house and went, you know what, we might as well put some value into this house. We weren't going to do as much of a remodel, but we're like, let's just do it. So we ended up putting in a pretty big remodel. We ended up gutting the entire front of the house, a couple of bathrooms, redoing the yard, pool systems. I mean, we put in a pretty good amount. So we bought the house for $700,000, and the down payment was that 1031 exchange from the condo.
Okay.
So then we took 6 months to renovate it, and it went quickly because My husband basically lived there and was working with the subs on site every day. So he was pushing them and I was pushing them. After those 6 months, the property appraised for 1.2 million.
Wow. Well done. That's a lot of it. That's a lot of value add you got.
Yep. So I did a cash out refinance and I put that loan in a DSCR loan so that I could get that out of our name. So it was separate, in the LLC. We then took that money and we bought we bought 3 more properties. We bought 2 up in the mountains by us. We bought another ski house in Utah outside of Bryan Head. And then we did another project in Palm Springs that was a flip. I found an undervalued property that I could add some equity and value to. So my husband stayed out there. We did some remodeling, redecorating. Then we sold it right away. And then with that money, we bought another short-term rental that was bigger and better and more luxurious than that one.
Okay. Cool. And does that account for all your short-term rentals now?
So as of right now, we have 5. So
Okay.
we owned and sold like 7 or 8. And then now we have the 5 solid ones.
Yeah. And you mentioned something really key, whether it's short-term or long-term rental. When you've got the opportunity, when a property is going to be worth more, whether you did a value add or maybe you just bought in a good market and appreciated, the smart investors take that opportunity. They go back, they equity harvest, pull money out, and then they go out and buy more assets. So whether it's short-term or long-term, that's something that investors have been around for a while know. Always keep that money working, going out, redeploying it to purchase and keep growing your portfolio. I don't ever intend to stop doing that. I've done that multiple times. And every time you do it, it's kind of neat because your real estate now is providing the seed capital to grow your portfolio. You're not having to create it out of savings from your ordinary income, but now your portfolio is beginning to become self-sustaining. It's creating the down payments for the new purchases. So I got a good feel. So your portfolio's in Palm Springs and then in this ski resort over in Utah. So the Western area. For you, obviously you went in a fairly short period of time and grew that. What do you see are some of the big advantages of short-term rentals?
It's definitely going to be, 2 things. The cash flow is a lot higher, but the other side of that, this is active investing versus, my long-term rentals with a property manager in Birmingham, Alabama. That is so passive. I don't even think about it. I forget that I own them half of the time. The property manager does the day-to-day. And I love that. Like I don't want to grow my short-term rental portfolio that much larger because it is a lot more active and it does cost a lot more. And I do love the long-term rentals that are just passive. And I love the diversification of having a little bit of both. I really, truly do. The long-term rentals, I specialize in luxury homes where we've got people, the cabins that I have up in the mountains here, I'm attracting people from LA. And the client that I'm attracting is a high-end, I've got, designer pieces and luxury. That is who I'm attracting at those. Palm Springs is the same thing. We are getting people from San Diego, Orange County, and LA actually. And again, it's luxury, designer, high-end. My cabin in Utah is right outside of the ski resort, and it's right outside of Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park. That property is really also luxury, but it caters to large families. It's a huge home. So we get a lot of reunions and a lot of families meeting together, but it is also luxury and high-end. So I charge a higher price point. I have another property out in the desert. Again, it's in a golf resort community. It's high-end and luxury. So I'm paying a lot more for these properties and they cost a lot more to maintain. The amenities that I'm adding and, all those things. And so the biggest difference would be price point and cash flow. Those are going to be the 2 biggest differences, and the active versus passive investing.
Right. So, give me a ballpark. So, I mean, I realize you've got more expenses, right? You've got to pay for the internet and, all those, monthly expenses are on you. But after you back those out, and I realize you got different ones, but if you were to average it, what would be kind of an average cash flow for, let's say, that $700,000 property annually after paying the expenses? Just a ballpark.
Yeah, so actually my highest performing property is my cabin in Utah. And it's primarily because it's not in an HOA. It has really low property taxes because it's in Utah. And I don't have yard care or pool care. There's no pool there, so I don't have expenses. Pool care is really expensive. I don't have yard care because there's no grass there. It's just, kind of forest. So when you take out those things, then we're definitely going to profit more. So that one property brings in consistently profit $5,000 to $6,000 a month.
Wow. That's a big difference, and I'll talk a little bit about long term. If I would say just an average one on a long term on where I buy in the Midwest, let's say it's around $300, could be 200, 400 a month, right? So let's say annually it's 3 to 4 grand, give or take. You're making what I make in a year on one of my lower priced assets. You're making more than that in a month. So
Mhm.
that's a huge advantage. Then is just a lot more cash flow coming in. That have you ever thought of potentially outsourcing the management, or do you like to be involved in kind of the active management of these?
Well, that's kind of where my journey started. I did hire a property manager in the beginning, and they charge a lot. So single family, they charge, 8 to 10% on average. Short-term rentals, they charge 25 to 35%. So they eat up a large part of your profit. And so when I started looking into what tasks they were doing, I was like, I can do that. I don't need them to do that because I could probably market my property better than them because I know my house better and I could photograph it better or, hire a photographer better. I can write up the details better. The only thing that they're doing is managing the cleaners or the handymen, if they're handy people. If something goes wrong on the property, they're managing that. So all you have to do is find your own cleaners that you can have a relationship with, have your people ready to go. If something happens, a toilet breaks, have your people ready to go to be able to take care of it. You can nowadays, there's so many sites you can market your own property on your own, VRBO, Airbnb. You don't need a property manager for that. And then the last piece is just communicating with your guests. And that's where a lot of people get hung up. They think, oh, that just takes up all my time. I have to sit on my phone all day waiting to communicate with guests. But once I dove into all these problems, they're just problems and you can solve them. So, you put together a list of everything that you see would be an issue, and then you solve each one. And one of them with the communication is there's automations. So there's tools out there that communicate for you for the entire guest experience. They think they're talking to you. And if you say the right words and you check in at the right times and you give them the proper communication, it's flawless from start to beginning. And so it's just a matter of that's where my trial and error was getting this started, is what tools, what to say, when to say it, how to do it, and that's what I've put together, which is now what I coach students and I teach people how to do this on their own. I'm a firm believer that you can do it on your own. Now, some people don't want to. And they're like, I work a full-time job. I don't want to think about it. And that's totally fine. Just be prepared when you run the numbers to put in 25 to 30% property management fee. And then
Yeah,
you
no.
can be pretty passive.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty significant fee. How much time does it take? And I realize every month's a little different, but on average, how much time out of a month do you spend managing and doing everything involved with your short-term rentals?
So I manage 5 of my own properties and I co-manage 2 for a client of mine that just didn't want to deal with it. So I took on their properties as well. And I spend less than 30 minutes a day on 7 properties.
Wow. Okay. So it's a little time here and there, but it's not a big hit really in terms of from a time perspective.
It's not. And that's the thing with, I call it active investing because you are very active in the very beginning. I mean, you have to learn, you have to set up your property, you have to furnish it, you have to deal with your cleaners and all the people, and you're putting together all this stuff, all the systems, all the automations, you're building this thing. So you're building a business that does take time. once you do it, it's done. It's just kind of checking up on it, fine tuning the pricing, but it runs itself, which is the beauty of it. But you do have to, you can't just 100% set it and forget it like we can in, our long terms in Alabama. You're definitely checking in now and then. You have to pay your utilities, you have to pay the cable bill. You're making all those payments as well. You can set up on auto pay, but there is a little bit more manual work on that back end of the business.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. That's probably a given. There's a little bit, but if you're talking 4 properties to performing that well with that much cash flow, I think most people in America be willing to put in half an hour a day on average to get that amount of positive cash flow. That's a pretty good ROI in my opinion. 30 minutes a day here or there to make that sort of positive cash flow. That's huge. So big positive cash flow, right? Probably another one. You haven't mentioned it, but you kind of alluded to it. A lot of these vacation destinations, because they're smaller, I think you're going to have a good chance for appreciation. If you're in a good spot, like you did your homework in Utah, you buy at one number, but because a lot of people want that lifestyle and second homes and baby boomers are aging, I think you're going to see pretty good appreciation, in a lot of vacation destinations. Everything I read, we're going to see that for the next 5, 10, 15 years, these areas going up.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the thing too, is finding value add. You can find it anywhere. For example, the cabin I bought in Utah, the second one, was brand new construction. And so I was able to get in on that one a little bit early with the builder. So I got it for a little bit of a discount because of how we worked that arrangement out. And then by the time it was done and built out and then furnished it and everything else, and just because the market has grown, absolutely, I built value there. So you can do that with long-term rentals as well with new construction. If you can work with the builders to get a little bit of you're reserving that property early, so you're going to get a little bit of a discount, and then you've got some instant equity when it's done.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think are the biggest negatives, or you pick just a few of the biggest challenges or negatives? What would they be with short-term rentals?
Well, I would say price point is what keeps a lot of people from being able to do it. You have to think about where you want to go on vacation, a type of place that you want to stay. And if you don't want to be, you personally don't want to be around the corner near a liquor store where there's, a lot of crime going on, most likely your guests won't either. So you have to pick areas where people are going to feel safe and secure, or there's a reason why they're there, whether it's by, a football stadium and there's sports going on, or, whatever they are. You need to be aware of who the client is, who the guest is that you're attracting. And then you create that space around who that is. Most people choose themselves as, what do I want? Like your place that you're doing in Italy, you're like, hey, this is what I would want. I am my guest avatar. So most people do that. Some people don't, but I always encourage everybody you have to know who that guest is first and then create that space. So price point is going to keep people back a little bit. And then, you being responsible for every single thing, every single guest at the house. The minute that house is rented and that guest checks in, anything could happen at any time. You could get that call at 2:00 in the morning that something is going on. That's if you're self-managing.
Okay.
So the other thing is, I would say, the ups and downs of the market. Some areas are very tourist heavy during certain seasons, and then other seasons the house is completely dead and it's empty. And the way that I look at my properties is, I love each and every one of them, and I love to visit each and every one of them. So I can go visit them during those slow times. We can use it. We can be there with our family and friends when it's not being rented. So I have a little bit of a different outlook. I'm not too stressed about that part of it, because we want to use them and enjoy them as well.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage, right? You have this thing that's producing all this cash flow and you're getting all the benefits of real estate. And guess what? You got to go to Palm Springs when you want to hang out there, or go to Utah and ski or play in the summer. So that's what I think is a huge advantage of short term, is that you get personal use. So you get the financial benefit, But let's face it, right? Nobody works 365 days a year. We all want a vacation and relax. So if you can do that essentially for free in your own property, why not? That to me seems to be a big advantage.
Well, and then you get to write the trip off because
Right.
you're there to maintain that property. So it's a free vacation any way you look at it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, before we switch over to long term, anything else you want to add of just things that you've learned? It's been fascinating to hear how you started one place, then took that equity, did some 1031s, and then built upon that. But any other nuggets of wisdom that you want to share?
Yeah, I would say, your mindset going into whatever real estate transaction is, whether it's short term or long term, you have to understand all the benefits of that asset or that project or property or whatever you're buying, because there will be hard times. With, like we always talk about, long-term rentals, at some point there will be a maintenance call, there will be a vacancy, and you need to be prepared for it. And a lot of people especially with the short term, it got really popular really fast during COVID when people couldn't travel outside the United States and they were just traveling to these areas around where they live and discovered new areas and thought, oh, I want to be a short-term rental owner, I want to buy this house, this looks fun. Well, it is fun, but it's a lot of work. And if you don't know what you're doing, a lot of these people are now failing and they're floundering and they're freaking out and they're trying to sell their properties. That's the biggest thing right now that we see is a lot of luxury properties going on the market from failed short-term rental owners. And it's because they didn't understand why they were buying the asset, what the benefits of real estate are, the long-term benefits of appreciation and growth, the tax benefits, the fact that, yeah, sometimes the house might be vacant, but we're looking at it over the year. And so that you're going to have your highs and your lows, and you've got to be prepared and you have to put some money aside. You can't just spend it all because you got it all. So just being a prepared, informed investor, no matter what you're buying, is the key to success. And you can't just freak out and sell it when you have that first, vacancy or that first, issue or problem. Short-term rental has those exact same problems. You just have to have that really strong fundamental knowledge about real estate investing, and that's how you're going to be successful.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I would say in any real estate investment, if you hang on long term, you'll always win. Maybe you win a little big, maybe you crush it with a home run, but not getting knocked out. That's where, in my years I've seen it. If somebody doesn't, you have a downturn and you don't have adequate reserves, you may not be able to float it through a tough time, or you have a big repair. I had one on one of my rentals, was a $30,000 basement issue I had to deal with. The home was literally crumbling and bowing in. I had to rebuild the whole basement. So you have to have capital set aside to handle these. Now that doesn't happen on every property. That's the outlier, but over time, stuff happens. Hey, one last thought I do want to ask you. I read recently that some of these markets have seen a decrease in rental rates. I saw a list recently. There's a place in Tennessee that saw the biggest swing from high rental to lower. How are you seeing that impact the market? Are you seeing that become a factor where there's maybe a little bit more supply, so it's driving down the average rate? Or are you just picking markets where you think, I know the market, those things might happen in other places, but my market, I know it, and it's not going to happen where I'm at? But can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of things that have happened. Definitely supply. I mean, everybody's like, hey, I want to own a short-term rental. I want to own a short-term rental. And so there's more supply in the market. And when you have people that don't know what they're doing and their property isn't renting, they freak out and they lower the price. So now all of a sudden it's a race to the bottom, because now they're lowering the price and the next person is lowering the price and the next person is lowering their price. And then all of a sudden everybody's lowering their price. So it's more the inexperienced investors that are causing this problem. And the way that you stand out and the way you combat that is you create your house or your property to be better than everybody else. You have to stand out in a market. So when everybody else is lowering their prices, I raise my prices, because I know that my property has the best amenities. It has the best luxury items. They're getting the best customer service at my properties. My properties look better. They, from the photo to the description to everything they're getting. And so once you put all of this together, you should not have to compete with those, let those other properties have that race to the bottom, and you continue to add more value and add an experience for your guests. And so we see that in a lot of markets, and I feel like that's going to shake out. And I think a lot of the inexperienced people are going to leave and sell. But we also saw, I think we're going back to pre-COVID normal numbers, because everybody got busy, and short-term rentals made so much money during COVID because people couldn't travel and fly anywhere else. So they went to these all drive-by local areas. So a lot of people thought, oh, I'm always going to make this much. But that's, now that COVID is done and people have a lot more places to go, they're not going to have as much demand. So we are going back to pre-COVID numbers. And that's where it comes to doing your homework and your research. So anybody that's looking to buy a short-term rental now, don't look at the numbers from the last 2 years. If you're on AirDNA or somebody's selling you a short-term rental, don't look at those numbers. Those are going to be inflated, and those are going to be really high. We want to look at the numbers before COVID, and we want to look at the numbers the last 6 months. That's going to give you the true numbers of what to expect. That's what you should be running.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. And I really like, you talked about adding value. You're taking ownership for your assets. You're making sure it's got good luxury items, good photographs. You're probably doing a really thorough description that makes it enticing and attractive, that probably even appeals to, a higher net worth type individual that's there's certain words, that are trendy, that are cool. You're probably going to drop those words in. So
Yep.
That's a neat advantage of owning a short-term rental, is that you can actively get involved and take some of those things in and move the needle. You're not outsourcing that to a property manager. So if you're good with decorating, you can hire a good photographer. You're good with wordsmithing. You make sure you're following up with the reviews. You can do that. I was thinking in commercial real estate, you have a commercial real estate where you do a value add, right? You take a saggy shopping center and you freshen it up. In a way, that's what you're doing with short-term rentals, is you're adding value, and the market's rewarding you with cash flow and appreciation. So
Yep.
super cool. Super cool. Well, let me switch gears. This part's actually not as exciting. I think like your portion, honestly, Melissa, talking about the short term is more fun because it's something you get a benefit from. So what I do primarily is invest in long-term rentals, where I rent them to somebody for, 1 year minimum, but ideally 2 or 3. And a lot of my markets are Midwest markets. So in contrast to kind of what you talked about, I have some properties I picked up for 70, 80, 90,000. I have others that are maybe over 200. But right now, today, my average purchase is maybe 130 to 160, somewhere in that range. So a little lower price point to get in. My properties are typically in what I call B neighborhoods, so they're going to be nice and safe. They're not going to be big, huge mansions, but they're not going to be the ghetto where there's crime. These are safe neighborhoods, nice front lawns. A lot of my houses are brick, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 3-bedroom, 1.5. Very ordinary, and in America, one of the things that I'm sure you're aware of is that depending on what study you look at, today we're about 4 to 6 million homes less than we need in the marketplace. Just we haven't kept up. And with the new construction that's come out has been on the high end luxury, not entry level. So a lot of people need a good, safe home. The ones that I typically go into, for those that are not familiar with this term, most everything I have are what are called turnkey properties. So somebody gets, what I call a grandma special, a home with good bones in a good part of town, but it's dated and maybe has the old linoleum and it's a little beat up. Maybe the ceiling's sagging. We need to freshen up floors. And so somebody comes in and buys that at a great price. They fix it up and they'll put in most of my properties have LVP. I'll put in a new roof, new water heater, new furnace, a new air conditioning. The kitchen will be freshened up, bring in stainless appliances, paint the cabinets, put on new pools, brand new bathroom. And so inside it looks nicer. Now, not as nice as your luxuries, Melissa. Mine's for, an average middle class type person, but it's freshened up. And then on the outside, the same thing, right? clean up the landscaping, trim the trees, put in bushes, fresh coat of paint, make it a nice, clean, safe house. If you were to pick my average cash flow, and it's certainly on some properties, it's much higher than this, but average probably around $300 a month, could be as little as two with the way rates are today, could be 5, 6, 7, 800. But let's say getting into something, I'm kind of looking around that 300 range. So on one house, I'll make 300 times 12 months. So my approach is get rich or get wealthy slowly over time, right? Get one base hit, get a single family, get another and another. And I just kept doing that over and over. So for me, the advantage of single family, I like, there's always going to be demand. People are always going to need an entry level home to rent. Our population's growing, whether it's through births or whether it's through migration, but we have a growing population. So I like that. I'm buying in nice neighborhoods that I think will appreciate. They'll go up 3, 4, 5% a year.
Yep.
You're in California, that seems to defy gravity on appreciation, where properties do this. My markets are just going to be slow, steady, but over 5, 10, 15 years, they'll go up. You probably know the statistic that on average, homes in America double in price every 20 years. So if you buy a home for 100 grand, 20 years will be 200, and then it'll be 400 and 800. If you go back to the 1950s, that's typically what residential real estate's done, is roughly every 20 years it doubles. And I'm giving that as a general. You're talking about some pockets that really well. I'm just talking about nationally. So the advantages, I get a home that's in pretty good shape. And so that means I've got hopefully a good 15 plus years before I have major mechanical things. I get a long-term tenant. So the disadvantage of long-term is going to be, I don't get nearly as much cash flow. For me to get $1,000, I got to buy 3 rentals to be at about 900. So for every 3, I'm getting 1,000. If you're getting 4, 5,000 on a property, that's me buying a whole lot of real estate just to equal the cash flow. So that's definitely a disadvantage. On the flip side, I have local property managers doing everything. So I don't have to manage my properties. I don't screen the tenants. I don't communicate with them. Most of my managers, I'm at about an 8% fee, particularly because if I have a volume of properties in that market, they could be 8.5 to 9, but somewhere in that range. And you gave this statistic of 8 to 10. If you buy one property, it could easily be 10. And then as you get a few more, the rates will drop down to 9, and 8's about as low as you'll go. But I don't have to manage my properties. Now, honestly, I still have to manage my managers. I've got one market where I've got 5 vacancies, and I'm really pushing that manager with things. Okay, do a move-in special, drop the rent, do this, do that. And frankly, I look at my managers as my partners. I'll send them gifts at Thanksgiving, at Christmas. I want to be their absolute number one favorite owner, or landlord. I want to be their favorite one, so that when they've got a choice of filling up a property, they'll think of me and my properties versus somebody's nicer. So that might be a little different way of looking at it for some people, but I just think of my managers are kind of my partners. They're my boots on the ground, and I want to treat them really well, and hopefully they'll treat me well, fill my properties up. So I buy in Midwest markets, places like Memphis, Tennessee, and St. Louis, Little Rock, Arkansas. I've got assets in Dayton and Cleveland, Jacksonville, Kansas City, Indianapolis, different markets like that. So not the vacation market where I'm appealing to a luxury person, but more of a middle class investor. So mine are just slow and steady. You do get, whether you go short term or long term, all real estate has a whole bunch of advantages. You get appreciation, and that's both in the property value, also in rents. So keep in mind, right now we're in an environment of higher interest rates. That means people are being pushed into renting, which means generally a little bit more rental demand. So, and a lot of us as owners have had prices go up, property taxes are up, insurance is up. So we're having to charge more rent just to cover our hard costs going up. We're doing that. So you get appreciation in value and also the asset. I use leverage on most everything. I've got some that are free and clear, but I use financing. So I'm using the bank's money to build my portfolio. You get tax advantages. And by the way, you didn't mention it, but I'll chime in on your end. There is what's known as a loophole, and I don't like using that word, but there is something called the short-term loophole, where if you manage for 100 hours, which I'm sure you do, you've got the ability to do a cost segregation study where you're able to get more depreciation on that rental property. And so there's a really neat tax advantage right now on short-term rentals where you can take advantage of that. And normally you have to deal with like active and passive income and the real estate professional designation. You don't need any of that. So right now with short-term rentals, it's a great time, I think, for people to pick up 1 or 2 short-term rentals, do a cost segregation study where you front load the tax advantages now, get that savings, and then maybe you go out and you buy 1 or 2 long-term rentals. So,
Yep.
just a neat planning opportunity to take advantage of what's in the tax code today and use that savings to go out and buy maybe another long-term rental property or 2 or more short-term. With mine, I don't see mine. I don't visit mine. In fact, I did that in one marketplace, and honestly, it was such a buzzkill. It was boring because they all looked like the pictures I'd seen. So I drive around. I have like 25 properties in St. Louis, and I saw 10 of them. And after a while, I was like, I think I'm done. They look exactly like my pictures. So,
Yep.
and that's an advantage for both of us. Technology now makes it so easy to buy something remote. I can
Yep.
go in on a Zillow map or Google Earth. I can look at the street. I can go up the street. I can go across and down. I can see what's around me. So I have a really good field. Not only does my house look okay, but the entire street looks good. And then I can go ahead and I can pull back and look at the next street over and see, ooh, is it going downhill?
Yep.
Technology makes it so easy.
Yep.
And then we get home inspections, we get appraisals. We have plenty of information. So I rarely look at my properties. It's just, I know some people that, they get all excited. It's pride of ownership and they want to kick the tires. And I'm the opposite. I am a passive investor. I just want the
Yep.
money showing up, and then I want everything else on autopilot. So going back to real estate, the other advantage, you got tax advantages, which are huge, right? Because you're operating a real estate business. You've leverage. And another one that you have is this term called debt debasement, right? Which means the inflation tends to make prices go up, but it also makes the cost of your debt go down. So if I have a loan that I pay back over 30 years, that payment in 30 years, even though it's the same payment amount, it's going to feel like less because inflation actually is a benefit to long-term investors. So I don't want to say I love inflation, but I kind of do. It kind of helps me get ahead. So, the way I see it, Melissa, you're either going to get beat up by inflation, it's going to crush you with higher prices at the grocery store and gas pump and utilities, or you're going to see that it's a tool. It's a given. We're going to have inflation. I'm of the belief we're going to continue to have significant inflation regardless of what the Fed does now. It's just baked into the system. So use inflation to help get wealthy and just have that as kind of a tailwind. So, but back to the long term, biggest disadvantage compared to you is certainly cash flow. The biggest advantage on the flip side is I'm relatively passive. I don't have to get involved. I don't have to deal with people. Another disadvantage probably is my properties aren't going to go up like yours. I'm just buying in metropolitan markets that are going to have 3, 4, 5% appreciation. You got a nice little spike over in Utah because you picked a little niche that you knew was going to be desirable to people in Utah, Arizona, California. And then you went in there and said, hey, this thing's going to pop because I studied the market. So you've got a little bit more appreciation. Mine's just the slow and steady approach, right? You get rich over time and just kind of let the assets grow my wealth in the background. So very, very different in that regard. Now, one big advantage for me would be those people who want to get involved in real estate. You can get involved in a single family home for $120,000 home, 20% down payment. You're talking 24 grand plus another few thousand for closing costs. So I think everybody, that's not in real estate. I'm a huge fan of everybody in America that wants to be financially free or independent, those words. Buy 5, 10, 15, 20 rentals. You don't need to have a lot more than that, but 10, 15, 20 rentals will change most Americans' lives because they give you the cash flow and the economic security that comes. And, think of that. We went through COVID. It wasn't nice to get rent checks from tenants out of state just coming in automatically. There were business owners that got whacked due to government controls, and it wasn't their fault, but their income was down. And yet my rental property income, was very consistent throughout that time. I had one or two that didn't pay, but overall it was really steady. So,
And Scott, one more thing too, that we didn't even talk about is regulations. You're not going to get shut down for regulations because they want the long-term owner to be providing safe, affordable housing when there's a lack of housing. The regulations on short-term rentals, I could get taken down tomorrow on any of my properties. They can just change something and all of a sudden I can't do short-term rental anymore. So that's another thing we didn't even talk about.
no, I'm glad you brought that up. I've looked at Steamboat. I love Steamboat Springs. They passed a law and only certain neighborhoods, those next to the ski slopes and a few others, can rent. Like literally everybody else, they said, nope, you can't rent. We have too many and we're going to regulate it. And now you've got to pay licensing fees and registration. And now you got people checking out everything. And that just adds, what I call friction to the process. It adds costs, and those costs get passed on to the end user in the form of higher rent. But in Steamboat Springs, if I would have purchased a property in, let's say, a family neighborhood that wasn't a designated short-term rental zone, I wouldn't be allowed to rent it. They didn't even grandfather people in. So,
Yep.
I think over time, I think, like it or not, I happen to not like it, but I think you're going to see more government regulation, in different areas of investing. Certainly in short-term areas, cities and municipalities are trying to kind of get a handle on it. And frankly, the hotel market is kind of pushing back, saying, hey, we built these huge, expensive hotels and our demand's down because everybody's opening up their houses. And so there's really a tension between the hotel industry and a lot of small property owners,
And they've got to get on with it. In fact, the biggest merger was VRBO, Expedia, and hotels.com. I think it was Expedia. I think that was the brand, one of those big brands. They just bought out. They own VRBO now because they're like, hey, we can't compete with it. We're going to now buy it.
Yeah, I saw that. I've used hotels.com all the time. I've got all these points, and all of a sudden I had all these nights, and then they kind of got watered down. It's not as good of a deal anymore. So
it's
oh
not.
well.
But yeah, so yeah, a lot of good points there.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to give, I think, honestly, I think there are more people curious about short-term rentals because they hear about the cash flow, and the perk of being able to use it is great. The long term is kind of a slow and steady approach. You'll win the game of real estate long term investing that way, but it isn't as fun. It isn't as sexy. I don't have any cool houses in Utah or Palm Springs. Mine are just kind of plain. I mean, I have 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses in Missouri, and I could live in any of my houses if I needed to, but these are entry-level houses, and they're not going to have the upgraded luxurious kitchen. I don't have quartz, and I don't have the big Viking appliances and all the cool stuff. Mine are ordinary, average, middle America homes. So it's a very different strategy. Now, why I like it, I think there's always going to be a demand for it. And frankly, we could have a recession and people say, hey, I can't afford to travel to the beach or the mountains, or I got to pull back. We haven't had that, but that could happen where there's not as much demand for a year or two. And long-term, you're fine, but you could have an off year where people say, ooh, we got to tighten the belt. We just can't do the luxury vacation this year. With my property, somebody has to live somewhere, and they're either going to live in an apartment or one of my single family rentals that I lease long-term. So, a yin and a yang there.
And that brings up a really good point too, is any investment property that I'm buying, but especially short-term rental, I run both scenarios. Is I say, can I rent this full time? If something were to happen, or regulations, or like you said, downturn in luxury vacations, can I turn this into a long-term rental, and how long could I sustain that? So I would say every single one of my properties, but probably the one in Utah, I could turn into a full-time rental and probably profit.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think that's really important for people to look at as well is, can you do both? And that's the ticket to win, I think.
Okay, Melissa, that you just threw out pure gold on that. So everybody take a note of what Melissa said. Plan A, short-term rental. Plan B, she has an exit strategy or a backup plan where all these people are getting whacked as they're in on plan A. And if it
Yep.
doesn't go well, they don't have a backup plan or two. So you did your homework. You said, hey, this could carry itself as a long-term rental, and maybe it's not as profitable, but it works. So great nugget you just tossed out there. Have plan A, but do your homework to say, if I need to switch approaches, can it sustain it? Can I cover my mortgage? Can I cover my expenses? And if you can, then you're going to win both ways. So it's a win-win. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're busy. I had one screen I just want to put on for people that are kind of looking at today's lending costs. Cause I know, Melissa, I hear this all the time. I'm sure you do too. Rates are up and it's more expensive. And the answer is yes, financing is more expensive. I'm of the belief that if you're buying today and you're getting a good buy that cash flows, whether it's long-term or short-term, sometime down the road, we're going to have an opportunity to refi at a lower rate. And most likely when rates go down, demand will go up and that'll push up property values. So I feel like I'm locking in good buys today. I've got a portfolio of 7 right now under contract, and my interest rate's going to be in the low 8s. It'll be about 8.3%. And I'm gladly doing that because I think I'm making a wise investment for the long term. So any thoughts on that from you?
I agree 1,000%. And going back to this strategy is if the rates go down and the values go up, that means you're gonna have more equity in your property, which means you can do your cash out refinance at the same time, take that money out, buy more properties.
You got it. So, hey, I brought up a slide here, kind of a blended approach, which we both talked about. Any thoughts you want to share on that before we kind of go down home stretch and wrap it up?
No, I think we hit all of these very, very well.
Yeah. That's what's been great too in this. You and I talked. It's great to hear that both of our approaches have merits and advantages, right? And you don't have to be one or the other. You could do a little bit of both, and maybe you've got a bias towards one approach versus the other. But those that are seasoned investors are really doing both. They're getting both long-term and short-term. So do both and incorporate it in, and maybe look at what makes sense in your marketplace. You've exposed some great local opportunities, some niche areas that are just highly desirable. There are places like that all over the country, right? There are golf courses in Florida that are desirable. There are lakes up in Michigan and Minnesota that are prime. Almost every state has a really neat vacation or resort destination associated with it. And look in your local market and see what makes sense. Melissa, you've shared a whole lot, but how do people get in touch with you? How do they learn more? And I know you've got resources out there. So I brought them up on the screen. Talk a little bit about how people can find you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So one thing that I wanted to draw attention to is ignore the crazy lady in the flamingo float in the Palm Springs property. One thing that I have, it's a free, anybody can message me, email me at ladyluckinvestments@gmail.com or message me on Instagram or YouTube. Ask me for a copy of, I just put together a list of the top 75 cities in the US that are projected to be the highest profiting Airbnb or short-term rental properties for 2023. And I actually bumped it up. So there's actually 100. So there's a little bit of a surprise 25 in there. There's cities on there that will shock you. In fact, one of the cities, and I didn't make up this data. This data literally comes from, I compiled many sources from like AirDNA, Price Labs, Airbnb, a couple of companies that I use. So I put a lot of time and effort into this. So ask me for your free copy. And I did a video that goes along with it, how to use it. But what's shocking about it, and I think this is really cool for long-term investors as well, is there's some cities on there that have been really good long-term rental cities. One of them is Montgomery, Alabama. And I own properties in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's always been a long-term rental. And so I started running the numbers on it as a short-term rental. And I went, oh my gosh, I could turn my long-term rental into a short-term rental. And I didn't even think about it. I just have to do a few upgrades and a few features and stuff. But so those of you who own long-term rentals also, like I told you, the opposite is, before we were talking about turning your or your short-term rental into a long-term rental if you have to. But why don't you look at your long-term rentals and see if you can turn those into short-term rentals and do it the opposite way as well? You might shock yourself like I did and see, oh, I already own a property here. I could double my cash flow. So my property manager just renewed my lease there, which is fine because they raised the rents by like $200, which I was more than happy to accept. But now when that tenant moves out, I might consider turning that one into a long-term rental, or sorry, a short-term rental. So anyway, so message me. I'll send you your free copy of this and check it out.
Hey, excellent. So all of Melissa's contact information is there. You can see she's the ladyluckinvestments.com, Lady Luck Investments at Gmail. Hello, Lady Luck. You get the idea. She's more than just lucky. She did her homework. She's smart and savvy, but that's a cool list. In fact, when we're done, shoot that over to me, because I like to see some of my cities if I got the potential to do that. I'm always open to, one of the things to become a successful real estate investor is you learn to get new information and your strategy evolves over time. So I love that. What a great resource. So check out Lady Luck Investments and all of the different ways to reach out to Melissa. On my end, I've got a whole course where I show people from A to Z how to buy your first single family rental long-term, how to scale, how to work with property managers, how to evaluate, how to look at what to buy. And then I get a lot into the tax side. My background's strong on the tax, so I go into 1031s and cost segregation and all sorts of stuff. So if that's something that's appealing, I've got a course out there for $697 that'll show you from A to Z how to get into long-term properties. And really what I did is I just recorded everything that I've done myself. So it's all real life experience. None of it's theory. I'll show my actual properties. And what I do with my course is I'll show you some of my mistakes. When I didn't do a sewer scope, and it cost me 17 grand. So if I can save everybody time and money by not making mistakes I've made, because I've done a few things right and I've screwed up a whole bunch of things. And so in my training, I share the good things and I share the ugly things. So hopefully you can learn from my experience. And spending, $697 on a course is a really small fee versus making a mistake like that. So that's kind of my whole class. Hey, it's been great visiting with you. There's the contact information again, Lady Luck Investments, and then me at scottrsaunders.com. Melissa, great visiting with you. So much fun, so much great information. This has just been awesome.
I agree. So fun connecting with you. I love this this forum that we did. Forum? What is this called? Podcast? I don't know.
Interaction, discussion, I guess.
Putting our brains together is just amazing. I love it.